Welcome to Snow Talk, where the Snow and Ice Management Association brings you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. This season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX, so settle in and let's talk snow.
It's your job. It's your truck. Now it's your time to put it to work with the V-Plow you've been waiting for. The all-new 7.5-foot Western Enforcer V-Plow. Purpose-built for half-ton trucks, yet engineered with all the features, efficiency, and performance of full-size Western V-Plows, like ultra-lock double-acting cylinders and independent trip-edge protection. The all-new Western Enforcer V-Plow. Get more jobs done faster. For more information or to find your local Western dealer, visit westernplows.com.
Welcome back to another episode of CIMA's podcast, Snow Talk. My name is Amanda Press, Member Services Manager here at CIMA, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us for our episode today. Thank you all for taking some time with us. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the 2025 Gulf Coast Blizzard. That's right, I said Gulf Coast. And I'm thrilled that Levi J is joining us to share his experiences that he and his team had during that event. Levi is a longtime industry leader, holding his advanced snow manager and certified snow professional credentials through CIMA, and is a CEO of Jet Facility Consultants, LLC, located in Indiana. Welcome, Levi. Thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate being here, Amanda. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just briefly, if you could give us a little bit of background on you, like how did you get your start in the industry, and give a little bit of overview of your experience to set the stage for individuals that might not be familiar with your work.
I started in the industry by taking a job with Case Snow Management. It was still called that. I think it's now Case FMS. It was probably a couple of months into my employment there that there was a big snowstorm that hit the Atlantic coast. And so Case was asked to send a bunch of personnel and resources and equipment down into the Carolinas to help kind of, back up some of the contractors down there, but, also really, do a lot of self-performing work because I think they'd gotten maybe close to a foot of snow, went pretty far toward the coast too. It wasn't just in the higher elevations, but that experience, I, really got to work a lot of snow sites side by side with guys from Massachusetts who've been doing this, their whole life. And, here I am from Indiana with not really a perfect understanding of the snow removal world at that time. It was probably just held, the local site manager would hire whoever they want, and that was pretty much the end of it. I didn't know that there was, so much that went into it. But that first year, I learned a lot of lessons, and then, from there, I took a promotion to a salaried field manager, and that kind of started my journey across the United States, going to a lot of different places to help Case do one thing or another. And did that for probably a couple of years before taking another promotion, this time more toward the account management side of things. And, kind of running a team here in the Midwest, and eventually worked my way up to a regional director of operations before leaving Case. And then shortly after that, started my own company with kind of the thought of really wanting to work with the service providers and, help them just improve what they're doing and improve their education, improve their training, and, improve operations processes. I kept working on that, and then went to work for Caliber Service Management, was a field leader for them for 2 or 3 years. And with that, I continued to kind of try to build my things on the side in the background, and eventually left there this past winter and, doing much more of my own thing now. And then somewhat recently too, took another job working for Allen Rose Consulting as a consultant for them, which has been an awesome opportunity to get to learn and speak with John Allen and Lisa Rose, and just, learn a lot more about the history of the industry, and also, seeing things from another angle too, where they do a lot of slip and fall education and things of that nature. It's been interesting to see that angle too.
Sounds like you really had a baptism by fire experience when you first started.
Yes. And, when I remember going to Case that very first time, and they gave us a little tour of the offices there. I mean, Case has a beautiful beautiful building there in Attleboro and tons of property loaded up with tons of equipment and, just seeing all that for the first time. And I remember, they had TVs posted everywhere and with, radar on loop and weather being shown. And it's just, I've always been kind of a weather geek myself, more so in terms of severe weather, being out here in the Midwest. I've been interested with snow, but severe weather, tornadoes, that sort of thing was what got me interested in weather to begin with. But, seeing an industry that exists solely because of weather, was something else that really just kind of grabbed me.
I love a good storm from a safe distance, but love a good storm. Speaking of good storms, let's jump to the main show here. And I know it was from somebody that, from my perspective, former contractor and now on the association side of things, I couldn't sleep hearing about like the news stories and like things. And not because I had any responsibility, just because I had like flashbacks of the pressure and the logistics of trying to manage a storm of that caliber. So first, talk to us a bit, if you could refresh our audience's memory on what that storm was, how it developed, what it kind of looked like.
So right around January 19th, 20th is kind of when the storm started to unleash.
How many days out was your eye on it prior to your mobilization? Do you remember? Are we talking a week, 2 weeks?
I would say 7 to 8 days, probably.
Okay. I think when individuals think about like traveling for storms and responding to these things, that's a pretty short window.
Yeah. And really, I mean, in terms of weather, 7 to 8 days, that's a long window, so, and it wasn't that, 7 to 8 days, we had our mind made, okay, this is what we're going to do. This was, 7 to 8 days. Hey, there might be something coming. But again, it's a Gulf Coast area and, anyone who pays attention to southern snow knows that, the forecast they can change rapidly. And
for us in the North, we have the equipment, we have the plows, we have the know-how. We're talking about an area in the country that may have never seen snow before, not even seen it. Yeah.
And, I'll give credit. We were watching the GFS, weather model and really it kept it pretty consistent, which was, a little surprising. The models kept showing, again, just right along the coast, a low forming and again, showing snow. And so it wasn't until probably about 2 days out and we were still very unsure. And then the National Weather Service posted their winter storm watches. And even then, there was still doubt, but, we kind of had a come to Jesus type of conversation about it and just said, look, if this does play out and the Weather Service is right and all these models are correct, this is going to be something that these people can't handle. I mean, it's just, and, we have to just take a leap of faith really and just go and see what happens. Well, yeah. So it started in Houston and, so you had a decent chunk of Texas that got involved before it started to move east. And so you talk about an area from that Houston kind of area all the way through the coast, through the Panhandle, up the Carolinas. So, a pretty big area. And that was one of the challenges is we don't know where to go because, the forecast, it's not that they're all the same, but 4 inches in Panama City is still pretty detrimental to that area. And, so it was kind of, it felt like you pick pretty much anywhere along the coast and probably be okay. But at the same time, we knew, okay, once this falls, we're not really going to be able to get anywhere else rather than where we are because, DOT is not going to be able to clear the roads in time for us to use them. So,
just getting crews, logistically the job sites, my own little like Pennsylvania market because DOT didn't keep some highways open that we had anticipated and had to reroute crews and to the townships. I can only imagine what that's like in the South.
I'm driving in a plow truck and I could clear my own path, but as well as I do, like that really cuts down on your travel time if you're having to plow the road you're traveling down. So when we decided to go, our initial thought was that we were going to head toward like Gulfport, Mississippi. Once we're there, then we'll kind of figure out what we're going to do from there. Fortunately for us, I would say 90% of this drive was completely fine, because the other part about the storm is that, it wasn't like the storm was coming across and hitting more of the mainland areas of Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and these places. And then, it was still getting the coast too. Like the coast was the bullseye. And so as you headed north into these areas, like the impacts were less. So us coming from the north, driving into the south, we didn't really experience anything until after Nashville, the southbound traffic cut off. We were it. Yeah. And so at that point, we were able to increase our convoy speed quite a bit. And so we were making very, very good time headed down toward that Gulfport area. We got into, I think it was Birmingham. And so, a few of our guys had like a passenger with them that came down. And so they were kind of able to watch the weather. And so these guys, they were watching the Weather Channel and Fox Weather and just,
logistics and planning.
Yeah.
Right. Passengers are able to call and kind of unite the convoy as the convoy is making progress down. So you were really coming up and formulating your plan as you're.
Yeah. So then one of our guys, Steve, kind of spoke up and he was like, hey, if we're trying to go somewhere to plow snow, we need to maybe head toward New Orleans, because New Orleans had kind of been the bullseye for snow, but at least in the beginning, it wasn't that much different of a forecast from the other areas. But as we started to get down, in the last few hours before the storm started to impact that area, they just kept ramping up the snow totals and got to be where it was like, hey, New Orleans might be looking at, 6 to 10, 8 to 12. So then we adjusted our GPS and started heading that way.
What did you have with you? I know you mentioned 14 vehicles or 14 plow trucks. How much salt, talk to me just briefly about the logistics
Sure.
of what you took and what was your decision process with that?
So 14 trucks, I think 13 of those had 2.5 yard sanders. Everyone had a V-blade plow. And again, the trucks were at least 3/4 ton or better. One of our trucks had a plow, but also kind of a mechanic type truck. And then, it's important to note, we made this trip with no work guaranteed. So it wasn't like we knew what we were heading into and knew what we'd be servicing and said, okay, hey, 14 trucks should do it. It was more of a put out a feeler to some of the guys saying, look, work's not guaranteed. No, we're pretty confident we'll find something to do down there. But again, what it is and what it's going to pay, we don't know that. We had guys on standby back home waiting for a call to move south. So, and of course, they eventually got that call. And so for about 48 hours time, we had guys by groups of 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, hitting 65 south and heading down that way.
I think it's two valuable things to note. One, you have the forthright, the mindset to know I'm going to need a maintenance truck. I'm going to need some mechanics, some sort of capabilities in case something breaks down, as it always does, right? As it always does. And then also, I'm assuming your home market where you were was not being affected by this current storm. So you had the flexibility to be able to move crews around with such ease.
So during this time frame, it was quiet at home. I think there was one day that, I don't know, there was a very small event, maybe like borderline de-icing type of event. But we had left enough guys home, to be able to take care of those assets. And we weren't leaving people back home high and dry for us to go chase them. Yeah.
Okay. So you've got the equipment, you've got 14 trucks, you've got salt, you've got the crew, you've got other people on standby. You're rolling into the New Orleans area, snow, or Louisiana, snow's starting to fly.
Sort of the next thing, once we got into an area and started actually seeing snow. And it wasn't too long after that we got a notification that New Orleans and most of the state of Louisiana was under a blizzard warning, which was the first time ever a blizzard warning had been issued in Louisiana. I'd put out some feeler emails and made some calls early in the morning on our drive down. We had let some of the national clients and some of the management companies know that we were making this journey down. And one of the first places I called was, and I can't remember if it was Fox 8 or Fox 6. I think it was Fox 8 in New Orleans. I called the news station and got through to the news desk. And I said, hey, this is going to sound crazy, but I sent you guys an email a couple hours ago. And, I'm with this group from Indiana. We're down here with plow trucks. We're looking to help out and to be of service, but we just don't know who to contact, who needs help, and so I spent probably, 5 or 10 minutes on the phone with them. And actually, the guy I was talking to was like, hey, he goes, I actually just read your email seconds before you called me. And so, he's kind of, maybe like further vetting me, just asking me some, more questions and stuff so that, cause, he's going to then take this information to someone else. And he's like, that there's multiple ways we can go about this, but he was like, let me make some phone calls. And he said, if you've not heard anything either from me or from someone else in maybe 2 or 3 hours, he's like, give me a call back. I said, okay. And within probably a half an hour of that phone conversation, I got a phone call from another New Orleans number, and it was the deputy director of the Homeland Security Department for New Orleans. And I'm like, I'm an hour outside the city right now. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And so basically over the next, I don't know, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, it was him and I kind of trading calls back and forth and text, just trying to come to an agreement on what they want us to do. And so it wasn't very long after that, we had a verbal agreement in place for our trucks to come in and work for Orleans Parish and essentially the city of New Orleans. The next move was for me and Andy. He's the president of the company I was working with, my actual client. Him and I kind of left the group there at the gas station, and we drove in to meet everyone at City Hall. So we get to New Orleans City Hall building and go to the top floor, which is their emergency operations center. We had to have been up there for another 2 or 3 hours anyway. Some of it was them, I don't know, helping, like showing us maps and trying to explain the city to us a little bit.
Yeah. Where's the pressure points? Where's the main thoroughways? What's the highest priority?
I just kind of said, hey, it's not that we're stupid, but we're not going to be able to become familiar enough with this city in the time we have for you to be able to call out where we need to go and us to know where the hell you're talking about. At this point, we're just kind of being asked all these questions about snow removal, snow itself, our capabilities, our experience, just all this stuff, and because, and I say stuff, and I swear I'm not trying to make fun of the people down there because you don't know what you don't know. And in contrast, I'm sure that if there was a hurricane coming off of Lake Michigan, that we in Indiana would have equally elementary type questions about what we're facing, but in their head, because this storm is especially bad timing for them because just a couple weeks later from that, they're hosting a Super Bowl. And then a couple weeks from that, they're hosting Mardi Gras. So
huge for the city, right? Like they need to be prepared and open.
And they've done all this work to helping improve some of the roads and maybe put down some new striping and whatever, just in anticipation of the Super Bowl. So one of the questions they asked, in their minds, they thought, all right, if you drop the plow and start plowing our street, that's going to just roll up the asphalt or something. So it was questions like that and working through that. Again, trying to explain, no, our plows aren't going to really cause damage like that to anything. And in fact, I mean, at that point, they should have really warned us about their streets, because it was really our plows that were in jeopardy. It was not their streets, because a lot of the things that you find out in the moment. And the, city engineers, the road engineers that have made these streets down here have never had to worry about a plow ever going down them. We finally came to an agreement on everything. We sold it as a 24-hour block and said, look, we're taking our direction from you. If you don't have work to keep us going for 24 hours, that's your problem. That's not our problem.
What about liability, insurance, your company, the city, who's on the hook? Like, how did you work out those details? Did you have in your mind or a rough idea of what terms you wanted in your contract prior to even being in this situation?
So fortunately for us, we did have some protection with the city. And then also my clients' office managers were working pretty quickly to get us covered in Louisiana. That was something else too, where, and actually they had to draw up like a separate policy or something, like an extra rider or whatever, because they had to kind of go above and beyond to get that sorted out. We felt okay in that regard, just because one of the things we recognized right away was, aside from us, there was no one else on the street. And well, but even like up north, I mean, you get situations where people shouldn't be out and there are states of emergency declared. And then there's all these warnings and advisories. People really, really took these warnings seriously and they stayed home and didn't risk it. And,
awesome.
Which made our jobs a lot easier. The navigating was tough because, you're going to use your GPS, but they had closed the interstates and like the U.S. highways that ran through this area. So everything is telling you, oh, you got to take I-10 over to here. And it's not even like we're begging with the officers that have these roads blocked. Hey, let us up here so we can get to where we're going faster. You don't even worry about us getting stuck. Like, we're not going to get stuck. But they just would not relent. And there were, troopers, New Orleans police, different parish departments. And every one of them had the same answer. And it was just so frustrating, having to do that. But so anyway, that first 24 hours, we were again tasked with multiples of these bridges. We had some routes. And then there were a handful of hospitals in the general area that they had us kind of help open up. I think the hospitals had some stuff themselves, not a ton, but a little bit. But we still went in and, helped open up like the roadways around the hospital and, some of the routes. Right. Yeah. So some of the routes to the hospital. And then what was really cool is so we worked hand in hand with the Department of Public Works. They would have like one of their dump trucks or whatever lead us around. So we would just follow them, which fantastic for getting around at that point. We had 3 days of running every red light we wanted to because people were just shutting down intersections for us. And it was fantastic. I'm pretty sure, it took a lot of our guys maybe 2 or 3 days after getting used to being back home and having to stop for red lights. I'm quite certain there were some tickets that went out because of that.
What was the wildest thing you or your team saw? Like, I remember seeing one was a retired NHL hockey player doing drills in the middle of this intersection that was iced over. I was like, it's crazy. I can only imagine. I put myself in like the shoes of like a 10-year-old kid, right? Seeing snow for the first time, this blizzard condition. Like, what was the wildest thing that you guys experienced?
Seeing palm trees wilted over with snow on top of them was definitely a weird thing to see. People started coming out a little bit. And they still really weren't in their cars all that much. It was mainly just walking around and again, for them, I mean, this has never happened. So like they're out having snowball fights and building snowmen and just trying to have fun with it. But one of the things that we noticed right away, and it was cool because it was something that we all got to experience at different points, and it was a frequent occurrence. But when our convoys would drive down these stretches of road where people are at, I mean, they would all just stop. And for one, you stop, take out your phone to record what's happening, but I mean, they were clapping, they were cheering. It was as if they were welcoming us from, like returning from war or something. But that didn't end. Like, that kept going every time, like these people would see us. And it's just like, wow, like this, like that's something that, because snow removal guys back north, you're not treated in that way. I mean, you're a borderline inconvenience to most people,
I was going to say this for my concluding comments. For you and your team were heroes. I mean, you kept this city open. Think about the lives and the cost of the what if. Like if people couldn't get to those hospitals, if they couldn't get, I mean, yes, schools are closed, companies have closed down, you're, blizzard conditions, stay home. Doesn't mean people still don't have heart attacks and emergency situations and, power outages and things of that nature. I mean, you were true heroes in that area. In the North, we use it as a talking point with our clients, trying to educate property managers that like, this is a first responder situation, we're not the inconvenience that needs to plow or salt the Chick-fil-A line and we got to like hold up traffic here. I mean, this is really important stuff you guys were doing.
Guys would hear through the grapevine of, people in the city kind of bestowing that name on us, calling us like the heroes of New Orleans. And it's like, that's kind of cool. Again, probably not really needed, but still, like it was a cool thing. And, really kind of maybe showed to some of our guys, like, how much it meant to the people down there for us being down there,
For sure. And thank you for your service. I didn't realize you had a military background. How many on your team have a military experience?
So I would say between the military and then firefighting, I would say probably about half of them.
Towards the fire, not away from it, run towards the snow blizzard.
Yes. And, those mentalities help really well when you're traveling long distances and going into the unknown and trying to make the best out of whatever situation you're in. So having guys with that background, that's kind of a benefit of that most people don't ordinarily think about.
For sure. So now you're still in your first 24-hour block. How much longer were you there for?
Yeah. So it was probably about 12, 16 hours in of that first 24 where they said, all right, we're going to extend you guys another 24. And then it was, probably actually it was when we made the deal, they told us to go ahead and start bringing in more trucks. So at that point, we made the call back home to start sending guys. So that second day was really highlighted by us being asked to help open the airport. So through this whole ordeal, something that we had to deal with, and it wasn't, I say deal with using it lightly, but the Louisiana DOT, because through it all, like we kept asking to do the interstates. When we very first met with the city, it was, hey, like that's a no-brainer for me. I can drive from mile marker to mile marker on I-10, not have to know where not have to know too much else. But again, they were like, well, like that's state, we're parish or we're city. So I said, okay. But as we went on, there were things that were DOT responsibilities that kind of kept falling to us. And anyway, but the airport was one of these things where I think maybe the DOT was supposed to have, some function in that. But at the airport, I think they actually picked up about 12 inches of snow at the airport there. And fortunately, a couple of the guys that we had brought down, they have experience in working a terminal at the Indianapolis airport. So at first, we were just asked to come in and do the land side. But again, quickly it turned into, well, hey, can you guys do this too? But we got that wrapped up pretty quickly. And so I think it was 12 hours after the blizzard warning had been allowed to expire, we had the Louis B. Armstrong International Airport open back up. The airport was open for planes to land if they needed to, like an emergency. Like the gates weren't open because the airlines hadn't yet called back their employees, but the airport was operational from a sense where, they could land, take off if they needed to. But yeah, then shortly after that, we were finally asked to come in and open the interstates within New Orleans. So the I-10, the I-510, the I-610, they had us open up.
Had they even been touched yet?
So yeah, we were suspicious of what had been done because on some of the, some of the bridges, like some of the elevated roads and stuff, you could kind of catch glimpses every once in a while of like the interstate deck. And, you could tell that there's nothing been done with the snow removal, the way I see it. And I think the way the industry at large probably sees it from the start, you go until you're done. Sure, if you have shifts and you can give guys breaks, congratulations, more power to you, but I think we all know that maybe that's not how it always goes. And really you're used to working, all the way through the night. And one of the things we ran into was around 3 or 4 in the morning, our escorts from the DPW, they get tired and they want to call it a night. So it'd be around, 4 in the morning where they'd be like, okay, you guys are good. And we wouldn't have but be back here or be back somewhere at this time, so now we're going back to our hotel with no real time to return until they blow up my phone the next morning, and anyway, so again, the last 72, city calls me in the morning and they're freaking out, and they're like, hey, the governor's here and he is pissed. And I was like, what did we do? Like I was assuming the worst, like pissed at us. And, they go, no. So on his descent to land, he could see all the interstates still snow covered. He couldn't land at the airport he wanted to. He had to land at our airport. And then on his drive in from there to City Hall, he was, aggravated really at why some of these streets in New Orleans are bare pavement but his interstates, right. And so, and I go, okay, what do you need from us? And she goes, he wants you guys to do, again, the I-10, 510, and 610 within the city limits, within Orleans parish limits. So, we started out on that, which was the first time any of us had plowed an interstate before. And again, we're doing it with pickups, and it was, it was cool. One of the things so the reflective markers to mark the lanes. So up here in Indiana, and as most of the northern areas are, they cut out a little strip in the asphalt and they put that down in there and make it flush with the pavement. Down here, they pour out a little patch of hot asphalt and throw the thing on top of it. No, just going along, boom, 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 boom. And one after the other just flying. You guys know that like that jarring impact when you hit something. We weren't trying to hit them, but the road was snow covered. You didn't know where they were. And
oh my gosh. I'm sorry, I'm chuckling. I apologize, listeners. I could just see it. I could just see it. See them flying off, flying up into the air. I could see that. I could feel the impact on my seatbelt as you're hitting each one.
It was comical for sure. But yeah, so, we went through and got everything open, the exits, the entryways, all of that was done. And then so finally, so we had like an overnight, and then our 72 ended that next day around 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so, once we woke up that morning, the city's asking me, hey, are we good to reopen the interstates? And I'm like, how is that my call? Like I don't work for the city, like that's gotta be up the chain. That's not me. And
on it and make the call, right?
yeah, right. And but they're pressing me like, no, like we want, I'm like, okay, how about this? Let me take me and 2 or 3 guys, and we'll go out, and because when we plowed everything, a lot of it we were pretty comfortable saying it's good to go. Like we were bare pavement over 90% of it. One of the things that I think that property owners, property managers, contractors, whatever, that everybody thought going into this was it's going to be a wait and see, because being in the Gulf Coast, how long is this going to stay around? That next day, I mean, it was 50 something. Again, just, a huge bright sun, clear sky. And don't be wrong. I mean, obviously, we had a lot of melting, but there was a lot of snow still left over. I said, look, I go, you guys are good. One thing I'll caution you on though. I said, there are some areas still where we have some snow buildup on shoulders, and that's going to continue to melt. And you've got like one more overnight where you're supposed to have temps at or near below freezing. So I said, my advice would be to send out maybe some police officers, some troopers that next morning before rush hour is expected to check things out. So I don't want people thinking they can come out here and do, 70, 80 miles an hour tomorrow and there be, patches of black ice or something. But you at least need to have eyes on the roadways, and maybe consider like a delayed opening tomorrow morning just to get you by or something. But yeah, and then, we finally got the clear that, we were off the clock, and, went out that night and to Bourbon Street and celebrated a little bit.
Before we get to that, I just want to take a quick pause here, and I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors over at Fisher and Western. Thanks them for being part of the Snow Talk's ongoing success, and we greatly value their support.
I do want to give a shout out to my Western plow on my truck. Held up fantastic. Down there.
I will say the one thing that caught my eye, and it was you had a ride along, a news broadcast top in the truck with you, and that's how I found this experience. And I was kind of giggling to myself, right? Because the broadcaster's sitting in your, shotgun to you, and then in your back seat is the camera guy, and he's like, or a woman, I'm not sure what the individual was, trying to hold the camera out the window and like look at the snow. They've never seen this before, and their listeners never have. They're fascinated by it.
And a few of our guys experienced this too, where again, people would be walking past, and they would actually ask, "Hey, can I touch your truck?" Like they would just come out and just put a finger to the plow, like as if they're like making sure that it's real. Like,
man, let's Monday morning quarterback this whole situation, this whole event. What's the best lessons you learned from it? And if this occurs again, what would you do different? Would you do it again?
I would absolutely do it again. There's probably a good, page or two worth of questions, worth of, just information that I would want to know from that city or town going into it, things that they need to consider. Because, and again, no fault to them, but New Orleans had never considered plowing their streets before, and in what order things should be done, and what that should look like. And there's a lot of considerations to be made. And so I think, having that kind of written out to be able to, if we walked into City Hall and handed them, a couple of pages of notes to, hey, you review this, and then this is the information we need. At that point, we could have probably, helped a little bit, come up with maybe a little bit of a better plan. It wasn't their plan was bad or anything like that, really. I mean, all things considered, I think they, being the city and the DPW workers and the city leaders, they handled it very well. And especially like the DPW workers. I mean, they at one point opened up their shop to us, to where if we had things break down, we could roll in there, they'd help us get back to good.
Yes.
So
That's amazing. That's awesome.
yeah. Yeah. But no, it's just, I think one of the lessons is just knowing what it takes to be a traveling snow group. And, we're working on kind of refining those practices going forward. Cause I think, again, given the circumstances, we performed very well with, what we had. And again, considering all things, but of course there's room for improvement. And, we're looking at that to see, what next season might hold.
That's awesome. That is great. That is really great. It's a niche market, and it's one that I think is going to become more and more as storms and weather become more volatile and unpredictable type of things. I was having a great conversation with Katie Rayo, WeatherWorks, about how their services and weather predictions meteorologists are going to become more and more needed.
Oh.
So for my role during all of this going on, my phone was buzzing with people in the South. How do I get in touch with a snow contractor? I Googled and you came up. Can you send somebody? I'm like, well, we're an association. I can pull a list of people that travel. I can pull this, things like that. Something that Simon's considering, I think that we're going to do is with our directory, have our members be able to list on there whether they travel for snow or not. So then if a area gets in a similar thing, they can at least use that as a resource, see who travels to this area, go that way, but it was interesting having conversations and connecting people throughout that whole multi-state region with contractors in the north that could possibly help them. And then yours was an extreme case for what you did, but we had a lot of individuals and a lot of members that have southern locations that get snow every once in a while, and maybe some of their branches or people, could come from the north down and support and help. But still, there was a lot of people managing that storm that never seen snow before. So it was interesting. Wow.
We were told that we were the first people to ever plow the city of New Orleans. The last time that they had received what we would consider plowable snow, I think was 1895 or 1897, something crazy like that. It makes you wonder if this is not just a wild one-off or what the weather pattern holds for the next 20 to 30 years.
And I think about the calculated risk that you took, right? Because it was a gamble.
Oh.
It could have changed, right? You left before the snowflakes were flying, and that's a heck of a lot of mobilization to not come home with, payment at the end of it. Luckily, it was in your favor, but that was an absolute risk. And I think that's something to be noted, right? That's not something to take lightly by any means, that an individual that may not have your breadth of experience to think that, next storm, I'm going to be a storm chaser. And,
no. There are so many things that could have went wrong on that trip. But again, we got lucky when it mattered, and, we're rewarded for taking the risk,
Awesome. Well, before we close today, Levi, tell me what you love most about the industry. Why do you keep doing it?
For one thing, it's wildly unpredictable. No matter, how certain you are about a storm and what it's going to do, where it's going to impact, it's almost always likely to still throw a last minute curveball. And, I think that we're judged on our ability to maneuver and still be able to hit that curveball, and, a lot of that's just the training and preparation that goes into it. There's so many people still that look at snow and assume that it's a 2 or 3 month thing. But, the ones that do it right, the ones that know, it's a 12-month job. And, there's so much to do. And right now, if you're not working on reworking your plans and reworking how you do things, not to say that it's broken, but, just looking at it from a kind of a quality control standpoint, what are some things that we can maybe do better? Where are our goals? Again, when it comes to weather, there's so many guys out there that just use, like the generic weather app on their iPhone, still want to be called a professional, and I mean, those two things just don't add up. I mean, there's so many weather resources out there, and you mentioned WeatherWorks. I mean, there's AccuWeather, there's CompuWeather, there's BAM Weather, there's all sorts of things out there, and they're all really good at what they do. And, it helps us out
They are an amazing tool for the industry. Amazing tool. I mean, I think back 50, 20 years ago when some of that technology wasn't available. It's game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, but yeah, no, it's just that makes it much less boring than a lot of other industries where, you kind of know what's coming.
Well, Levi, thank you for taking a deep dive and sharing your experience on what was really a wild, wild storm. Thank you for everything that you do for the industry, raising all of us up. I'll echo what I said earlier. You and your crew certainly are true heroes for doing that. Yes, you got paid for it, of course, but come on, man. There's much easier ways to make a living than that. That's phenomenal. Thank you again to our sponsors, Fisher and Western, and hope you join us again soon.
Thanks for listening to Snow Talk, sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX. Check out all of our episodes at sima.org/podcast.